Good afternoon. We are live. I am joined here today with Shaun Rickard and Karl Harrison, and they're going to talk to me about a very important court case. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, Natasha. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining me. Why don't each of you give the audience a description of who you are and what you're doing?
All right. My name's Shaun Rickard. By day, I'm a contractor. I own a exterior home improvement business. And in December, on December 24th, 2021, we filed a lawsuit against the federal government against the vaccine travel ban that the Trudeau government put in place. And that now has been going on. Our original case, as I said, started December 24th, 2021. That was declared moot. We're now in a second case, which has been given the green light to go to trial. And we're in court on Monday to trying to get to appeal to get some additional sections of the charter allowed to go through to our final trial. So, and I'll let Karl take it up from there.
Yeah, hi Natasha. Thanks for having us on. It's really nice to meet you and nice to be on your show.
You too.
My name's Karl Harrison. I'm a father and a husband and a businessman. I'm based in Vancouver and lived in Canada since 2009. So reasonably fresh off the boat, I guess, I would suppose. I met Shaun when I saw him wanting to take some action in response to what I think we both felt were horrible government policies in the fall of 2021, which were going to prevent millions of hardworking Canadians from traveling to see their family or traveling abroad or really doing anything that one would normally do. And I felt at the time that with those kind of horrible government regulations, you've got three choices. You either accept them, you fight them, or you run away. And that's all the choice you've ever normally got with everything. And so I saw Shaun wanted to fight, and I thought, I've done a bit of this in the past and suing governments and so forth. And I thought I'd join him. And that's how I got started with Shaun. He said it'd be filed in Christmas Eve, 2024. And we've been arguing this ever since. And we were able in June of 2022 to force the AG to advise Cabinet to suspend their policies that were preventing so-called unvaccinated Canadians from traveling, just by virtue of evidence that came out in cross-examining the witnesses that they put up, and some of the evidence was not very good for them. And I think that the AG, who was David Lametti at the time, probably got his report in on it and looked at it and thought, well, we should probably stop this for the moment. And so they did. And we've been arguing it since and want to continue to argue it until we get a chance to have the evidence properly heard in the right court to try and get a decision that will prevent this government or another government in the future from doing this again, not just about things like COVID, but in any circumstance where they can just randomly stop people from exercising their charter rights to travel.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we highlight for people this notion of mootness, because there's another case that comes to mind that's totally unrelated to the COVID regime tyranny, but a friend of mine out east in the Maritimes was fined, and this became like a viral news story. He was fined for going for a walk during the forest fires,
Right.
because Jeff Evely, they put in a ban on walking outdoors in certain areas. And he had tried to fight this the first time that it happened. But when it got to court, well, the rule had changed, so it became moot. And it's a very handy way for the state to impose tyranny, take it away, impose it, take it away, and never have to contend with any legal challenges if the rule is rendered moot. But what it also means is that it can come back. And it's a perfect illustration of the fact that the state can end and might do that again if something's rendered moot. There's no guarantee that they won't. So the case is still very important, even though people have kind of memory hold the COVID regime. At any point, this law could or this mandate, they were never real laws, could come back into effect. Correct? Is that correct?
You nailed it. And again, just to reiterate, in June of 2022, the vaccine travel ban, I'll call it, wasn't revoked, wasn't lifted. It was merely suspended. So as you said, and then the case, because of that, declared moot when they suspended it. It was declared moot, but they can bring it back at any time. And given some of the new legislation that's coming out now, Bill C8, Bill C9, they could use this for a whole multitude of reasons, right? Bringing in sort of similar tyrannical measures. So yeah, it's we've been trying to kind of hit people over the head again, without being too obnoxious, but I can't stress that this case now is probably more important than it was when we initially started it, because of the way that our government is going right now with these tyrannical measures and new legislation they want to bring in.
Yeah, I mean, the mootness point is really interesting, and I think Jeff Everly there, has done some really, he did some really good work on that not walking in the woods ban that was coming up in his area of the country. I had some arguments with Jeff actually on other issues, but that's all healthy. We can agree to differ. But I think what he did on that was really good. And I'm not surprised that they've gone down the road of playing what you were describing there as the usual legal hokey cokey, which they do with this. They put something in and then take it out again once somebody challenges it. So I'm not surprised they've done that. And I think ultimately, the Supreme Court of Canada need to have a bit of a fresh look at mootness. I know that our friend Brian Peckford in his case tried to take that to the Supreme Court. We chose not to, because we were worried about an adverse outcome, but they didn't take it up anyway. And he would have only been arguing there on the issue of mootness, but I think he thought the same, that really we need to have a fresh look at this for the reasons you're saying, Natasha, which is that just because the abuse stops doesn't mean that people should get away with it. It wouldn't happen in the criminal code. You can't be a serial killer for 3 years, stop doing it, and that's okay. Right? So I think it is. It doesn't. You're right. It needs a fresh look, and I hope Jeff tries to pursue it a bit further. I don't know whether he is or he isn't.
Well, the other thing that he did the second time was that he insisted on being ticketed. So then there are damages, and then but citizens, I don't think, should have to be going to this extent just to ensure that we have non-arbitrary mandates imposed on us. But this is the world that we're living in, and here we are. So you're kind of going at it from that approach as well, right? From the approach of damages, right?
Correct.
Yeah. At the moment, that's the approach. It's a way of taking the case further without facing the same risk again. The first time was much more of an administrative civil action, and that did always risk the mootness issue. But the target was very much then about forcing the government to lift the ban. So that was kind of the first target, really, rather than focusing on having a day in court at some point, which would have always been a long time away, right? Because the government was always going to appeal everything. So the real urgent thing was to try to force the government to lift their their breach of people's charter rights under Section 6, their ability to travel. And so we had to think of a strategy to do that, which wasn't trying to injunct them. And so we chose a strategy that would force the government to field lots of experts. So we fielded some interesting experts that were quite unimpeachable. They wouldn't be able to easily pop a tinfoil hat on their head and deride them in cross-examination. So we pitched some fairly mainstream experts, and the government fortunately decided to wheel in 16 witnesses, which gave us a lot of targets to fire at. And our lawyer, who Shaun had met originally via Roman Baber, who is currently a federal Conservative MP, but was a federal MP in Ontario.
Provincial.
Young provincials, yeah. He introduced us to a great young lawyer called Sam Prazvelos, who probably some people would thought was too young, in his late 20s at the time. He's a fiery, intellectual young man, and he's really got hold of the case and got hold of their witnesses, which didn't help them at all. And he managed to extract lots of concessions from them that highlighted the weakness of the supporting evidence behind them having a ministerial order at all. So that was the target, really, not to try to have a big flamboyant trial at that time, which wasn't going to happen immediately. They just managed to put that off and put that off. So you'd be 2-3 years before you got there. It was really, how do we force them to stop doing this so that Canadians can travel again, or certainly 6 or 7 million of them that were being put upon.
Yeah. For people who are not Canadian, you need to understand that Canada is half the size of Russia. We live in a huge country, and we're spread from east to west across the country. So I have driven before from Montreal to Moose Jaw, just kind of, a halfway point from central Canada to halfway across the west. It takes 32 hours of driving to get there. To drive to Halifax takes, I think, 14. I'm trying to remember. I've driven there a few times. To get out to BC takes about 50 hours from Montreal. We live in a massive country, and you need to fly.
Yeah.
You need to take the train. That's how people need to travel to get from A to B. And because people have memory hold all of this a little bit, if it's all right with you guys, I'm going to play a video to remind people of what the environment was like and what the leadership, quote unquote, leadership was like at the time.
Well, we're not a country that makes vaccination mandatory, for example, but we want to encourage everyone to get it. I prefer to encourage people positively. We're going to make sure that people who choose not to get vaccinated don't get on a plane or a train, don't get to work in the public service, don't get by working with the provinces on vaccine certifications and mandates, don't get to go to movie theaters or gyms or restaurants and other non-essential services.
Our own public officials from the Public Health Agency of Canada did not have the science to support this policy. So the government initiated a study with a guy named David Fisman at the University of Toronto. And this study was so bad, Madam Speaker, that there's a book called Fisman's Fraud, The Rise of Canadian Hate Science.
This study, you say they flipped reality in doing the study. And in so saying, you mean that they basically falsified evidence, or what does that mean when they flipped reality?
When you look at the Omicron surge and you
So it reminds us a little bit of the environment at the time, what was going on, the kind of rhetoric from the prime minister, and then you can see the relationship with, the science. I'm someone who I get a little bit frustrated, I guess, with the arguments one way or the other about the trademark science, because I'm just of the belief that some dingbat that I didn't vote for doesn't get to tell me that I have to cover my face and trap me in my home for 3 years because he wants me to take a pharmaceutical product that I have no interest in taking. But I understand that, the courts need some kind of, I guess, standard of argumentation. So are you going to end up having to fight it out about the science, or is this more about charter rights? Like, what's the...
Well, I guess the nuts and bolts of it are that so going back to what was in the video there, even, we came, as Karl said, we had, they put up 16 witnesses, expert witnesses. And Sam did a phenomenal job. Our lawyer, Sam Presvelis, did a phenomenal job cross-examining them. And it took us 2 months to get through cross-examinations, if you can imagine. And during that process, there were two particular people of interest. One was Jennifer Little, who was a bureaucrat that ran a sort of a black ops team called the COVID recovery team, who were responsible for finding the science to justify the travel ban being implemented, and they never found it. And this all came out during cross-examination. This is all part of those 15,000 pages of evidence that we have. Also, Dr. Celia Lorenko, who a lot of people aren't aware of. I always try and throw a name out there because this woman was the I forget her title. I'll think of it in a moment, but she was essentially responsible for the authorization of the rollout of all the vaccines in Canada. She approved the rollout, and even while Sam was questioning her, she essentially admitted that nobody ever came to her to say if there was any science, because there wasn't any. They lied. They absolutely lied, and that's why they had to. This is where Regina Wattiel plays a big role in this. She did a phenomenal job of uncovering what the fellow David Fissman had been up to at University of Toronto when they used his fraudulent computer modeling data and called that following the science. But there was no science. And I'm like you, this whole follow the science thing drives me up the wall, drives me insane, because they never had it. And this is the reason they've been trying to do everything they can to prevent us getting to trial, because those documents have never been seen by the public yet. All that evidence that we have, the 15,000 pages, we've never actually made it to trial. We've now been given the green light to go to trial, but we need all 4 sections of the charter, which I'll let Karl's better explaining all that, what those 4 sections are. In our last hearing, they struck 2 sections of the charter. And right now, and when we go back to court on Monday, that's the purpose of the hearing on Monday, is to include those, is to have those 2 sections included. I'll let Karl take up from there, whatever that means.
Yeah, I mean, I think that your video you showed there is really interesting, and it shows the Prime Minister lying, basically, which is great to see, isn't it? To have your Prime Minister just lying so comfortably. He knew at the time when he was saying that the intention was to go ahead with mandating to some extent vaccines. He knew that. I mean, we could see that from documents that were leaked to us from meetings of the members of the Canadian Bar Association, who were essentially a bunch of cowardly lawyers who were going along with the whole thing and were going to find ways to get around various aspects of the law to enable this to go ahead. And also at the same time, they were going to form a team that Shaun just described called the COVID recovery team, which is one of those banal vanilla descriptions of something that isn't going to do anything like that at all. And head it up with a chief of staff from one of the assistant ministers in the transport department, and produce policies that would breach the charter rights of millions and millions of Canadians, but would form some kind of a useful campaign platform for the Prime Minister in the election he knew he was going to have. So we'd love at some point to subpoena Mr. Trudeau. It might disrupt his budding romance down in LA, but it would be to be able to do that. And maybe also the minister to just come back and explain some of the contradictions that were very apparent, such as we wouldn't do this in Canada, whilst at the same time planning to do it. He would have to probably deny that he knew anything about that, which might be troublesome for him. But nonetheless, that's the issue. So yeah, I mean, and David Fissman also gets mentioned in there. I think Fissman's an interesting villain in this piece, actually. Gina has written this rather wonderful book and has, to my knowledge, not received any threats of legal proceedings. So I suspect that her book will follow David Fissman around, like Bobby Kennedy's book will follow Anthony Fauci around for most of his life. He hasn't challenged her. It was interesting how he got involved in it. I think absent any science from Public Health Agency of Canada or from Health Canada to wrap around this rather odious policy they wanted to bring in, they had to go and find something they could use. And maybe they sort of asked questions internally and thought, well, do we have any sketchy scientists that we can fund to go and produce some fraudulent data that we can speak about on TV? And perhaps, you know, David Fissman was a willing party to do that, much to the shame of his department at the University of Toronto, I would think. But nonetheless, he went ahead and did it, and they trotted Mr. Fissman out all over TV as fast as they could. Interestingly, they've never sought to include his evidence in our case. I would dearly love for them to do that. But even without that, again, I'd hope to have an opportunity to help our lawyer to invite Mr. Fissman to come for a cross-examination session, and we can ask him some questions there, which will be probably hard. He'll be under oath then. It won't be like doing a committee hearing in Parliament, right? It won't be one of those where you can turn up and everybody's assumed to speak in good faith, and hardly any of them ever do.
Or a media interview.
Or a media interview. It would be actually something where he's going to have to put his name to it. And if he wants to put his name to it and lie, we'll have a good close look at whether he's perjuring himself.
I hope that over the course of this case, something will happen that shouldn't have to happen through a case like this. But fundamentally, the state imposed mandates, not laws. They didn't vote on any of this and enshrine it in laws, but they imposed really draconian impositions on Canadians, preventing them from traveling, that have nothing to do with air travel, right? Like there's no, when I've traveled within Canada, nobody has ever asked me for, you know, I don't know, if I've had a DPTT or whatever, if I've had various vaccinations. That's never happened over the course of my life. I have traveled to certain countries where, you know, maybe yellow fever, whatever. But within Canada, traveling within the country, there's no such imposition. So they kind of inserted public health into transportation, and there's no real basis for it, right? Like the bureaucrats are saying that it was based on the science, and the scientists are saying that it was based on public policy, and no real laws were made. It's just this kind of opaque tyranny, and nobody's fundamentally held accountable. So I'm hoping that over the course of this, there will be very clear communications, and someone will ultimately be, sorry, my hands talker, I hit my mic every time I do this, but somebody will ultimately be held accountable. And you would think that that would be, you know, the cabinet, the prime minister. But maybe I'm not articulating this very well, but it's just this Kafkaesque situation where nobody's actually responsible, and it's just this opaque science.
The Kafkaesque concept is right. I mean, there's lots of almost sort of catch-22 kind of concepts being thrown around in there as well. You'll find the blame being heaped on, for example, the American government at the time. So, you know, we've heard arguments from them where, oh, well, we weren't preventing you leaving the country. It was Joe Biden that was preventing you entering America. And it's all these kind of nonsensical, you know, Heller-esque, to go beyond Kafkaesque, concepts, where they want to try and find somebody else to point to other than themselves. So there were ministerial orders that were leveled at the regulations of the travel sector. So again, an attempt to blame the airlines, in fact, because it wasn't us that's doing it, would say the government, it's the airlines that's doing it to you. And then any exceptions to the policy were also foisted onto the airlines. So we've seen evidence in cross-examination that came out, lots of documents around letters between Air Canada and, WestJet and the government, where these airlines are clearly uncomfortable with the whole thing, right? And are having to go along with it because the regulation is actually being dropped on them. At the end of it, of course, in June of 2022, the CEO of Air Canada came out and damned the policy and said it was always wrong, it was always unscientific. That would have been nice of him to do that earlier.
Exactly.
I mean, corporate guys can be worse than anybody in terms of how cowardly they are about speaking, because they've got a brand to worry about and they all these kind of things. But it was unhelpful that the airlines kind of really didn't push back as hard as they probably could, because the reality.
Well, they were getting handouts though too. They were getting handouts.
Yeah, I mean, they were getting handouts. I mean, how far that really influences them, I don't know. I mean, governments do try to put people on financial risk, and then offer them, having thrown them in the water, they offer them a life vest, right? And this is sort of standard government procedure, really, and that happened in this case. But the truth of it is, right, that it was wholly unscientific. There were lots of people on these planes who hadn't been vaccinated. There were government officials who were exempted from having a vaccination. There were people coming into the country from all kinds of other countries who were getting on planes and they weren't vaccinated there. There were children, anybody under the age of 12 wasn't vaccinated, so they can't have been infectious either. And then there's a whole load of other exemptions. So probably by the time you got on the plane, half of it wasn't vaccinated anyway. The government was just trying to exclude the people that had pushed back. It was a classic case of a government angry that people pushed back and therefore wanted to punish them and hurt them.
A couple of important points we missed. Sorry, a couple of important points we missed on this. Obviously, it wasn't just air travel. It was all federally regulated travel, including trains. That could be ships, could be buses, right? Anything regulated by the federal government. And the other important point to remember is they knew at this point, just from what we've discovered during cross-examination, and again, I'll mention Celia Lorenko, she kind of confirmed this, that they knew at that time that these vaccines didn't even prevent transmission or infection, right? And they knew that.
That's what I wanted to interrupt to say. Like, they knew it was never a sterilizing vaccine. That was almost immediate. Even though they lied, that was lied about. I remember the tweet being put out by Moderna, and then it was retracted, or disappeared or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's important people remember that. It's like we get people, they were keeping people safe. Millions were dying. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't know one person who died of COVID.
No.
I knew some people that got sick. Possibly they had the flu or they had COVID. I know that, but they weren't that sick. I certainly don't know anyone who died. And the fact that people, again, were repeating that ridiculous line, I follow the science, was based on a lie put out by our own prime minister on our own mainstream media. It's insane.
Yeah. I didn't know anybody who died from it. The only reason I ever knew that I had it was because I was dragged through courts, in 2021. That's when that began for me over this whole situation. And so I had my titers tested and discovered that at some point I had it. I wasn't sick during that period of time, so it was so minimal for me that I didn't even know that I'd had it at some point. But I do know someone who died from the jab. He died from vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, and it was an agonizing death. And he was a young man who probably would have been perfectly fine, just like me, had he had COVID. Maybe he even had it before he got the jab. We don't know, because nobody was even being tested one way or the other. And nobody knew what would happen if you had it and then you got jabbed. And none of this was even investigated when these were forced on us. So,
yeah, I mean, the quality of testing was poor anyway. And that was open for debate. There were some interesting studies out at the end of, very early on, The one from I think the Children's Hospital in Vancouver, which indicated or started to indicate that perhaps 80% of people in Vancouver had already had COVID by the end of 2020. We chose, in our case, not to focus on the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. I mean, yes, it's true that they were known from the start. I mean, companies like Moderna and Pfizer and BioNTech, these are clever people, smart people with very good lawyers. They're not going to put themselves in a position of risk. If you looked at the forms they were filing with the regulatory authorities in the US in and around the stock markets, they have to file Form 10s each year. The Form 10s describe all their activities and highlight the risks so that their investors can see what those are. They tend to be pretty honest in those because they're going to get sued to death otherwise by some very big funds who have got the wherewithal to do that, and they'll see their share price damaged by doing that. So they tend to be truthful. And if you open the PDF of those and search for gene therapy, you'd find countless repetitions of this and reference to the fact that the Federal Drugs Agency and the states had until spring 2021 referred to all of these products as gene therapies. And of course, we ended up seeing the redefinition of vaccines in the spring. So there's lots of things that we know and we knew early on. All of those things were apparent but they weren't discussed. But our case, really, we chose not to get bogged down in that, because at the time, if you remember, the sort of the temperature was pretty high, and the narrative that was really adverse to anybody trying to go into court and argue that these products were risky. It doesn't matter whether you knew they were or not. And there was plenty of evidence that they were. I mean, if you were following Moderna, if you've been interested in the markets and these companies, you would have been following them. And in 2017, I mean, I've been following these things for years. In 2017, there were already reliable articles coming out highlighting that Moderna would run into safety problems with its products. So everybody knew this. They'd burned $4 billion trying to do it. They'd burned some of Gates's money trying to do it. Everybody was looking at what they were going to do. They thought they'd use it for cancer. It wasn't deemed safe. Yeah. It was a pivot into vaccines, right? And this is, I mean, the guy that runs that company, his original Canadian business partner very famously described him as a man without a moral compass. I mean, so Stefan Bancel, I don't think would rate, very highly as a man that was going to do the right thing. He's certainly going to do a profitable thing, and the hundreds of millions he's made has probably paid off for him quite well. But ultimately, we chose not to get into that in our court case. We chose to focus on the real sort of charter issues that were in there, so that the government couldn't just turn around and sort of dismiss our case as some kind of weird case, with a bunch of anti-vaxxers telling everybody that it was all unsafe. So we didn't have witnesses like that. And we know people who, I mean, Peter McCullough's a great example. Peter McCullough, Dr. Peter, great guy. He's been proven right. He's a man with a very high level of integrity. He's incredibly credentialed, but for us, he would have been entirely the wrong witness, right? Mm-hmm. He would have been, and I watched him cross-examined, and he's brilliant, and he's very hard, unimpeachable. It's very difficult for a government lawyer, untrained, to cross-examine somebody who's that highly credentialed. And I saw that in them cross-examining our witnesses. They found it very difficult because, of course, you have to let the witness answer, right? And so when they ask a question, then they're going to get 20-minute answer, from somebody who really knows what they're talking about. So you could see the frustration with government lawyers just not being able to undermine the witnesses. But we, as I say, specifically chose to focus not on things that at the time would have been derided or easily painted as some kind of conspiracy theorist, whatever other pejorative you want to throw at it. They would have done that. So our case is much more defined around the legal specifics of the breaches of the charter than that. So we've got Section 6, which is mobility, Section 7, which is really around the liberty and bodily autonomy, Section 12, which is normally criminal code material, which is cruel and unusual punishment. And we've just seen a very interesting Supreme Court decision on that in the last couple of days, which probably doesn't hurt our case, actually. It probably helps because it certainly lowers the bar.
But it only ever lowers the bar for degenerate pedos. The bar is never lowered for normal people. The bar is only ever lowered for people who are committing heinous crimes.
Yeah, I agree in that case, but it probably will turn out to be useful for us. So maybe we can find
perhaps.
Maybe we can find something good in it, even though it's very hard to do that. And then section 15, which is the issue of discrimination, and really whether the unvaccinated, who were largely defined by the government as a particular group of people, actually are a particular group of people and constitute a protected class. And so I don't think the government's very keen to hear any of this. I don't think really any government would want to hear any of this. It probably, if we were successful, it would probably rightly tie their hands and focus them. But we're not helped by our judicial system. We're not helped by our charter, particularly in some respects. So we'll end up being focused on section 1 at some point. But right now, as Shaun said, on Monday, we are appealing a narrow issue on the striking out of 2 aspects of our claim in relation to section 7 and section 12. We believe that people should be able to make a choice about what they do and don't put in their body, and they should not be subject to any form of punishment, coercion, threat, or otherwise in doing so. That's not a free choice. And then section 12, we would argue that the government created its own circumstances and then created its own punishment to specifically punish the people that were not agreeing with it and not going along with what it wanted. We'll see how it goes. It won't be a very long hearing, I don't think.
Will they have to prove, I mean, I would think they would have to, but will it come up that they will have to prove, how many lives were saved by this mandate, like what the effect of this mandate was, how many lives they intended to save? Because I assume if you're going to trample on people's rights, then you would have an incredibly airtight case of why that's necessary. People just dropping dead in the streets, and you're trying to prevent that from happening. Will they have to show any work on their theory?
Not in this, no. I mean, this is,
Okay.
I say, narrow appeal. It'll be interesting, and it will be worth watching for sure. It's a narrow issue about whether the judge in the latter part of 2024, who was an assistant judge called Trent Horn in the federal court, whether he was right to stop us proceeding at that point on section 7 and 12. We're able to proceed.
Okay, he wanted to limit the scope.
Yeah, so we don't think he's applying the same test. We don't think he's right in terms of a standard called correctness. And we'll be challenging that on Monday. So we're saying that he's made a mistake in how he's approached this. And the appeal will be heard on Monday by a judge in the federal court. It's unusual. It would normally go to the federal court of appeal, but because it's an assistant judge hearing a motion in 2024, this appeal is decided by a full judge, if you like, in the federal court at this stage, rather than going to the federal court of appeal.
So this is basically like before you're even able to get to any kind of trial. These are, I guess, the ways that the state is trying to slow the process down.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and we'll expect more of this. I mean, and equally, we had an agreement with the government in the previous case at the federal court level that they would not, in principle, oppose the introduction of the evidentiary record from that case into a subsequent damages claim. I imagine they'll renege on that, or
The
try
15,000 pages.
I imagine we'll have to go through a process of fighting motions where they will try to stop the evidentiary record being heard. It's a painful process, unfortunately, and very long-winded, and it's why these cases can end up taking years to actually come to any kind of a real conclusion. But I think there's aspects of this hearing on Monday that we would be prepared to run to the Supreme Court. I think I think the Section 12 part, I think, that's very interesting. There's not much legal authority around the use of Section 12 outside of the penal code. So I think there's some really
Section 12 is a cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah, it's normally applied. It's normally only used and that's where you saw the other day, which is the case where the Supreme Court decided that it would be unconstitutional for there to be a 1-year minimum sentence for people in possession or distributing child pornography, where they've kind of invented a hypothetical set of circumstances of 18-year-olds sharing some child pornography images and being caught by somehow accidentally doing it.
Whereas there were two real cases.
Yes,
there were two real cases with child sexual abuse material of degenerate perverts who'd had this material, extensive material for literal years, torturing toddlers. Yes. And then they debated this hypothetical situation to decide that, these hypothetical non-existent teenagers would be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment.
I'd be investigating these judges.
It's just it's beyond what I can explain rationally without becoming really frustrated. So I'll just stay cool for now.
Yeah, it's an overly technical point. I mean, it's a sort of a case where the very highest court is immersed in scrutinizing its own belly button, really, in a way, whereas I'm completely missing the sort of temperature and missing the room totally. I mean, it's probably a 98-2 issue, where there must be, apart from highly specialist lawyers who probably on the criminal defense side, who see use of this elsewhere in other cases. So I could understand that, right? I could understand that they might think this is a good decision. They'd put everything else to one side and say, I can use this in defending somebody else in a completely different crime. I can imagine that. Maybe somebody with a penchant for pedantry could really get involved in it. And then probably it could be supported by pedophiles who presumably think, well, you just rolled the red carpet out for us. Maybe we'll go and live in Canada because we're going to get a more lenient sentence. It's a poor decision, but it could be useful for us, in a different way in terms of demonstrating how low the bar is for how somebody would decide that a charter right under Section 12 was breached. So it could actually help us in a terrible decision, but could help us in an odd way.
Well, there were really cruel and unusual punishments applied to people who had committed no crimes and were convicted of no crimes during the COVID regime. And I think that's important to emphasize. And when people who were all on board with the tyranny say, you didn't need to work. Nobody has to work. Nobody has to visit a dying parent. Nobody has to volunteer at their kid's school. Nobody has to have surgery. Nobody has to give birth with their husband in the room. Like, it really shows the level of cruelty that they had towards their fellow citizens. And it's incredible to me that the court will render moot actual circumstances that all of us lived through for years. And then at the same time, they'll embark on this hypothetical case, which informs the sentencing of real convicted child abusers. Like, it's really, really difficult not to develop a high degree of mistrust towards our judicial system and our institutions when this is going on. So I wonder, do you think that the process is going to be a just process?
I'll tell you, just going back, they've thrown roadblocks at us the whole way here. Like, they never wanted this. They never wanted the evidence we uncovered in our cross-examinations to go to trial. I can't say that enough. And they've done everything in their power to prevent us going to a trial. Well, Trent Horn, Associate Judge Trent Horn, gave us that right to go to trial, but on limited grounds, right? Which is why we're doing the appeal on Monday. But the amount they've thrown at us, I don't know if you ever remember the case when it first started. They actually tried to strike Karl and mine's affidavits from our own lawsuit at the beginning. We had to spend tens of thousands of dollars to fight them on a motion. Just to tell you how ridiculous this all is that they filed a motion to strike our affidavit, and I forget the reason behind it, but it was essentially just a stalling tactic.
Yeah.
And you end up spending tens of thousands of dollars fighting this, and they continuously threw these motions at us like that, like absolutely asinine motion, to try and basically bankrupt and demoralize you, right? So the fact that we've got as far as we have on such an important case, and the fact that we now do have a green light to go to a hearing is good, but we do need those other aspects of the charter. But just to give people a sense of what we've been going through for the last 4 years, everything's a constant battle, and they've got deep pockets, right? Endless pockets.
Ours, yeah.
They're spending taxpayer money to fight this, and they'll essentially just throw anything they can at you to prevent you from moving in a forward direction. So,
but you must feel generous funding both sides of the lawsuit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And again, just to reiterate, or to be clear, we have some amazing supporters and followers who have been very generous with their donations over the years. Also, Karl has kindly donated his own money as well into this. You know, we're up there now. It's a lot of money. 4 years suing the government, and
How much has it cost?
It's certainly
probably close to
more than $500,000 now.
Yeah, probably close to 600,000 so far.
Yeah, it's not cheap. I mean, that's about, I mean, like Shaun said, we're very blessed to have people who are very supportive and have funded sort of half of the costs, really, and following us and supporting us, and that's been extremely helpful. But all the way, I mean, you can see by hearing that number, you can imagine to take this all the way, you're ending up with a cost eventually in seven figures to do this. And there's a lot of obstruction. Shaun mentions that one, which is quite interesting. The trying to strike affidavits, which is extremely unusual. But then again, affidavits. So this was a strategic approach by us in terms of how we were doing that, because affidavits are normally, my name's Karl Harrison. I live in Vancouver. I'm a father, a businessman, and it's the same as the introduction to this. Really, it's just not much more than that. And this is my complaint. And that's that. But what we wanted to do is, we thought, well, what's a judge going to read? When they first get all this, overwhelming amount of paperwork. What's actually somebody going to read before they get to court? And likely the affidavits. The claim form, the affidavits of the claimants, and maybe not a lot more than that, Bill. Maybe the motion records to some extent, but probably not any of the evidence that's in support. Not many of the files. They'll get to court, listen to what people have got to say, and then go off and look at that, having referenced with the key bits from what they hear in court. So what we did was we structured our affidavits to include a lot of areas that might heighten the curiosity of a judge in reading them. So, because what we were aware of, and this is a point that you were just touching on, you said, will any of the hearing that we've got be just? And it's a great question, and it's a great point. Nobody wants to point at the judiciary and say these people are biased. It's a real hard job, right? Being a judge, it's not an easy thing to be. It's a lot of work. I've got friends in the judiciary here and in the UK, and it's a really difficult job, and it's a vocation. You're giving up a lot of your life to go and write very complicated decisions and listen endlessly to very complex arguments, and to have to make very, very challenging decisions that could affect a lot of people. So no one wants to say you're all biased. It's too simplistic, right? It's not really like that. But certainly at the time, the government was very, very good. David Lametti is a devious and clever man. Let's not underestimate someone like Mr. Lametti. He's an ideological nightmare, right? So this guy had thought about this very hard, and even had set up meetings with all the judiciary across the country to supposedly how they were going to manage the administration of justice during this this pandemic, and when everything would be closed. Now, if you think that's all he was discussing in those meetings, you'd have to be a complete fool. I mean, obviously, there's going to be more that's going to be discussed, and some of the things are going to be, he's going to be touching on some of the outcomes that might, and some of the cases that might come forward, and some of the government's preferred outcomes, and et cetera, et cetera. They were very good at getting the courts to wear masks and do all the performative stuff that was making them think a certain way from the start.
Yeah.
So that they were coming out, literally, the Supreme Court and the federal court proudly came out and said, all our judges are vaccinated. It would have been like them saying, here's our, the federal court sponsored by Pfizer, right?
I don't understand how that right there isn't a major breach.
That tweet's still up, eh? That tweet is still up on the federal court.
Federal Court of Appeal head, who's gone now, the court, who's retired, but the Federal Court of Appeal Justice came out and said, Chief Justice said, I'm not doing this. He said, because likely as not, I'm going to have cases coming to me and our court that are going to include issues that are very much around this, and it's entirely wrong for the court to set out a position. And that was the only judge I heard in Canada who actually said what was blatantly obvious to say. And instead, Chief Justice Wagner in the Supreme Court and Crampton in the federal court, and most others said, we're going to announce that we're vaccinated. I don't see that was relevant at all.
Well, it's relevant to send the signal that you'd better not depart from that choice. I mean, we're the wisdom, we're wearing the robes, we make the decisions, and we control, the justice system, or I call it a legal system now. We control the legal system, so you'd better not depart from that choice. That's the message. I mean, there's absolutely no reason otherwise to put that up. I've never seen judges do anything like that in my entire life. It's just totally bizarre.
I mean,
unlike Karl, I wouldn't give most judges the credit that he does, but
you're a good cop, back up.
But yeah, I mean, it's just been to me, it's been to think that no one along the way was even willing to allow this case to be heard, basically, right? And that's what you're up against in today's world. It's disturbing to me. I'm convinced that much of the judiciary is compromised. That's just my opinion, throwing it out there. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
I've been told by a lawyer that it's preferable to say ideologically captured.
Yeah.
So I say that
instead. I'm gonna remember that one. That's a good one.
Ideologically captured, which I think is irrefutable when we know that over 90% of them are Liberal appointees. But I wanted to add this up. I know that, Shaun, you can't really see this.
No, because I'm on this tiny little screen here.
Yeah, but people can find it on your X.
Yeah, so if you want, I'll just give you the X handle. It's at Shaun Rickard, ShaunRickard 67. Shaun Rickard, at Shaun Rickard 67 on X. All of our updates are on there. All the links to register on the Zoom, and all the other updates regarding the case and what's been going on. There's a lot in the feed there right now if they want to, but they need to follow to get the feed in its latest form.
In its entirety. Yeah. So if you go to Shaun's feed, you'll end up here. I'll actually go right through it for people. So it's this post, new direct link to register and attend Monday's hearing.
There's a few of them. So yeah, if they don't find that one, they'll find another one with the new link. This is an instant link that literally, as you can see, pops up. They just simply put in their name, their email address, hit register, and they're done. Yeah,
that's
takes
it.
less than a minute.
Oh, it says an error occurred. I'll try doing it later, but that's what people need to do. So you should register so that you can watch this. So at what stage are you in, and what are you anticipating Monday?
Just while we're on this,
Oh,
I'd just
sorry. Yeah, do you want
like
me
to
to put it up
reiterate.
again?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I just want to reiterate to people how important it is that we get as many of those 6 to 7 million Canadians whose lives were negatively impacted by this to show up at court. With new technology now, we had almost 20,000 people register and view our case online in Ottawa when we went to the appeal hearing. We want to get similar numbers here if we can, because it's very important that the judiciary and the judges see that there is still very much public interest in this case. It's very important. Because one of the reasons, I don't know if you're aware, but one of the reasons that the last 4 cases were declared moot, one of the rationales that they gave was that there wasn't enough public interest in the case. And the fact that 20,000 people, the most ever in Canadian history, registered to watch a hearing, federal court hearing online, didn't sort of reflect to them that there is in fact public interest is mind-boggling to me. But again, that goes back to what we were saying earlier about how these judges are thinking and what they're, perhaps they're a little bit swayed in one direction, and it's certainly not ours, it seems. So
Was there any supportive evidence of the claim that there wasn't public interest, or did they say it wasn't in the public interest? Did they say there was a
no,
lack of public
they,
interest, or it just wasn't in the public interest to go
do
forward?
you remember how it was worded? Do you remember how it was worded, Karl? I think it was it was literally stated that it wouldn't be there wouldn't.
Sufficient public interest. So
That's right.
it's
Yeah.
a very good distinction, Natasha, that you're making, whether it was in the public interest. I mean, that's a debatable itself, but it was about whether there was sufficient public interest. I don't know. It was unclear to me how they arrived at that. I mean, the federal court consider very arcane issues all the time, like patent disagreements and this, so on and so forth, like really detailed and heavyweight commercial issues predominantly is what they're thinking about. So, I mean, nobody's watching this stuff apart from the people that are on either side of it, who obviously have, huge amounts of money riding on it. But, I don't think anybody's ever really watched anything in the federal court. In fact, when you go to the federal court in Ottawa, there's not even a public gallery. You go and it's kind of like buried in some office building, like an accounting firm. And you kind of go up to wherever it is, the 10th floor or whatever, and there's a courtroom there, and there's about 4 seats at the back, and that's about it, right? And that seems strange to me. I mean, I come from England, where we have big courtrooms and big public galleries, and where people just, you can go to the High Court in central London there, and you can just walk in. You can go through security there. It's a public building. You can just walk in there, walk in and out of courtrooms. Right. Once you're cleared, and they know you've not got anything on you, you can just go and sit in any courtroom you want, listen to any trial you want. Right. And that's exactly how justice should be. It should be intensely public. Right. And that means that it's justice is literally being seen to be done because people are able to see it. And in Canada, for some reason, we've got this idea that that's something that the elites do.
Yeah.
It's not something that ordinary Canadians would be in. Just leave us to it. We'll do all that complicated stuff with Parliament and justice and the courts. Don't get involved. Just live your lives quietly. Go camping, whatever it is you want to do. Don't get involved in any of this stuff. It's too complicated, which is why I like what Jeff does. Jeff Everly does out there. I mean, he's trying to get himself involved. He's very vocal. And he's really sort of trying to push barriers and rattle people's cages. And I think he's right. I think that's what it needs, because it's not enough of that kind of confrontation in oh so polite Canada, right? It's like people feel uncivil by doing it, impolite by doing it. And
well, it's not lost on me that 2 Englishmen are doing this. Like, we're the Canadian men. I mean, I really appreciate that you 2 are doing this, but we're the Canadian men.
Well, we come from an argumentative country, and America's argumentative too, as you've seen. I mean, if you watch any of their committee hearings, you see how argumentative they are, and that's under oath as well, remember. But so, English people have their challenges and problems. We do, but we'll have a good argument and push back and be confrontational. And I just think that will change in Canada over time. And maybe this is one of the things that promotes it.
People are actually livid at us, like angry, to the point of like some of the comments. I'm at the point online. People are just so angry that we had the gall to file a lawsuit against the government, that we dare question their authority, that we dare question the mandates and what they were trying to do. They were trying to keep you safe, and it's mind-boggling to me in Canada, the mentality here of so many that
because you're questioning their daddy, so
you need to shut up. Just quickly going back to the court thing, give you another example of what we've been going through. So they did like the Zooms, for instance, right? The last time we got the final numbers and everything, and I was only able to do that by asking somebody who was running the Zoom in the court, because what happened was I was calling like once a month and then once a week as we led up to the trial, because we were running a call to action for people to register. And there was a lady at the court that I would call, and she would give me the numbers of how many people have registered, so I could post an update. I'm like, we've got 8,000 now, keep it going, that type of thing, right? Keep the momentum going. And then I called her one day, and she was ordered to stop telling me the numbers. Like, this is what you're up against in this country. It's insane. Like, she was literally told to stop. She wasn't allowed to give me any more numbers. And then when I went to the court, I asked the clerk, and the clerk, because they didn't want us posting it online and getting people to register.
No, but did they tell her? Like, did she tell you why?
No, she just says, I've been told I'm not allowed to tell you.
Not allowed. It's not my decision. I'm just a messenger.
Yeah. And we got him, but it was kind of a sneaky way I did it. We went in, the clerk wouldn't give us the final numbers in the court. So I just went up to one of the techie guys. I said, "Oh, how many are watching?" And he gave me the number, right? So, but it was, close to 20,000, close to 20,000 people watching a bloody court hearing in Canada. It's unheard of.
That's good. Hopefully it'll be more. Are you getting any support from the opposition? Are you getting any support from? Well, I mean, I won't even ask from the Libs, but from anybody, from any politicians?
Definitely not from the Liberal. No, not really. No, not at all. The most helpful politician in all this at the beginning was Roman Baba, who introduced us to our fantastic lawyer, Sam. So, but as far as we've reached out to various people, and again, I get it, the whole chess game they play, they got to focus on the issues that are hot at the moment. But for 4 years, none of these people, no from, no leadership in the Conservative Party has ever spoken out. There's been a few backbenchers that have mentioned, like you saw in the video and when you opened here. But as far as them, and again, it's not about supporting the case, because people say, well, the politicians, they shouldn't get involved in the legal. So it's about speaking to it, right? It's about acknowledging it, that good for these citizens taking Trudeau on for his tyrannical actions, right? We're holding Trudeau to account. And the fact that we're in federal court actually doing that, someone needs to be speaking about it and saying, good for them. And at least acknowledge it. Like, they haven't even acknowledged it.
I think Shaun's right that it's limited in terms of the support, and you can understand why, because they're sort of, the sort of anti-vax moniker is still pretty effective, right, in Canada. I mean, if you look at the numbers, polls, it's still a pretty effective form of slander. That's difficult. I mean, to be fair to Pierre Poilievre, he did launch a private members bill on this some time ago, and not many people are aware of that, but he did, and it was his own private members bill, and it was presented in Parliament by an MP from Niagara, and I was involved a little bit in that, in supporting that MP with the actual speech. So I think it's a difficult one. It is in court, and there's a very sort of strong tendency in Canada for politicians not to speak out about live court proceedings. They've got a very strong sub judice kind of culture here, which doesn't, again, it's not exactly the same in the States, and it's not the same from my experience in the UK. Lots of other countries, people will speak up even though it's going through court. And I agree with you. It is really their
Didn't stop him during the Freedom Convoy trial,
well,
did it?
but I mean, I think the key thing they could speak to, right? And I think this is, it's about understanding. I think there's a danger of thinking that politicians can always say what we personally think, and it's kind of like riding around on our own hobby horses. You know, that we in our silo, whichever it is, we think we've got a set of views. We want to hear a politician say them, and I think that's a kind of a narrow understanding. And a broader understanding is that they're looking at numbers which are telling them that if they say something, they're going to get hammered. And in Canada, it's really, really bad because we just don't have any kind of balanced media here. We don't mainstream media. We have media some of which is umbilically linked to the Prime Minister's office, which is literally receiving sort of daily messaging suggestions as to what they might say. I mean, which is insane. No editor, no producer should be considering that at all. They should just be pushing back against that. But with the funding they've had, all the things we know, that's what's going on. But one thing that people could be talking about is the way that which our case actually applies to all Canadians. It's not just something which applies to a limited group of people that some side might not like. This is the government's very good at doing this, creating division. And the best example is around the Freedom Convoy, which I think the best recent, I mean, this is now an internationally famous civil rights protest. Whatever people in Canada want to think about it, whatever liberal politicians want to think, this will dog Justin Trudeau's legacy for the rest of his life. It's much more famous than he is. He will dwindle into infamy, living in LA with a beard and longer hair and a baseball cap and some pop star, right? Trying to carve out a media career that no one will give him, right? He's got all that ahead of him. And the one thing that's going to follow him around is the Freedom Convoy. All of his life, people will link him to that. But what the Freedom Convoy was doing was it was making a legitimate civil liberties argument on behalf of all Canadians. Didn't matter whether you hated the truckers or lived in downtown Ottawa, or you were Paul Champ who wants to sue them afterwards for some nefarious, ludicrous claim that it pays him a lot of fees. All these kind of characters have got a vested interest in running it down, but it's a protest on behalf of every single one of 40 million Canadians because it was dealing with an issue of government overreach. And the same with our case. Our case deals with issues which are common to every single Canadian. And I always have this kind of way of looking at it, which is really simple. And I just say, don't get involved in building gallows, imagining that only your enemies are going to hang from them, right? And that's what people are doing. They're kind of imagining that they'll take a side, argue against our case, and say that our case is a bad thing. But the outcome of our case, if it's adverse to what we are trying to do, impacts negatively on all Canadians, because it gives the government, this government, any other government, the right in the future to impose similar restraints in different circumstances. And it's massively important that Canadians understand that our case is a case against government overreach and against government oppression, which will just be used by a liberal government in the future, a conservative government in the future, a PPC government in the future. Whoever your favorite party is will use stuff like this if they can. And that's what we're supposed to not be allowing to happen collectively. And that's a massively important point. And the conservative politicians could comfortably talk about that. They could talk about that. I don't expect them to go out and start saying that vaccines are bad and this, that, and the other, and whatever hobby horse we're all on at the moment. I don't expect that to happen. It's not going to happen, right? So be realistic.
It was never about, for me anyway, it was never about the vaccines. I mean, I was opposed to the COVID regime from March 2020 because it is a matter of principle. And on that was the colossal crushing failure of that mediocrity, Aaron O'Toole and the party under his leadership, was the fact that clown who was supposed to be the opposition, literally his only job was to shine a light and expose mistakes that the government is making in leadership, stood around with all the others and said, we're all in this together. We're all basically in imposing tyranny on all Canadians. And so then, of course, they couldn't criticize the government because they were part of it. So I was hoping that with the change of leadership, that there would be a strong voice against the tyranny. I probably have a lot more vaccines than I'd say 99.99% of people in the world, because I've traveled to 5 continents. For someone to call me an anti-vaxxer is absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
But I also didn't want to have to cover 2/3 of my face when I was out in public. I also didn't want the state telling me who could come into my home. I also didn't want the state telling me whether or not I could walk out in the streets of Quebec after a certain hour. These go to core principles, and they're fundamental rights and liberties. And they're not bestowed on me by Justin Trudeau or by Mark Carney. You know, these are self-evident freedoms that I'm supposed to have, that are supposed to be untouchable. And so that's what the CPC can argue. And that's what they're just ignoring it. And allowing the media to frame it as an anti-vaxxer thing is completely diminishing such a really, really important several years of tyranny into this, you know, were you vaccinated or not? It went on for years before the vaccines were even developed.
Yeah,
I 100% agree with you. I'm in the same place. You and I are vaccinated up to the hilt, right? And maybe we weren't questioning them for most of our lives. And
yeah, no, now I mean, I think I look at it differently. But prior to this, yeah,
the thing that they've done more than anything is created, like, you know, useful curiosity and skepticism around this whole issue, which of course people in America are now highlighting. More and more, you know, because the administration's changed. There are different people heading up high level departments on the medical side, and you know, and I've met some. I mean, I know Jay Bhattacharya, I know Marty Macri, and you know, it's interesting to find yourself knowing people who are kind of this high up now in an administration and listening to what they have to say. And they're very, very reasonable people. Right?
Mm-hmm.
These are seriously reasonable and sensible people, right? They're not kind of some wackos out there saying odd things. Neither is Bobby Kennedy, right? These are very sensible people, just highlighting the fact that really pharmaceuticals ought to be safe and vaccines ought to be tested in the way that every other pharmaceutical should be tested. It's not particularly contentious, but people were persuaded against their own interests to go with this. And I think there were some very, very clever psychologies right from the start. So if in March 2020, you were in that sort of crowd of people that were instantly concerned about this, and some of us were and some of us weren't. It's not a competition to see who got it first, right? It's like some of us were just more receptive. Maybe we had deeper civil liberty principles inside of ourselves that were discovered, and that's been the big division that's happened in Canada. You've seen that people but so I know people who were firm sort of liberals and NDP voters who are now not, because their civil liberty DNA was so profoundly offended by what happened that they shifted away completely and have either become politically homeless or they've become conservative in nature, not because they agree with all conservative policies, but because on this core principle, they are like you and they don't agree with it. And I didn't. I mean, I saw on day one, I was watching the madness and insanity of the whole thing. And I think, focus in, what are the things you should look at this point in time? And I thought, well, good example, we're talking about airplanes. I mean, when you're on an aircraft, if you're concerned about something, it's a good idea to look at the staff, isn't it? Good idea. If they're flustered, right, there's probably a problem, right? If they're still serving drinks and it's bumping around, but everyone's happy, there's probably nothing that's going on, right? But if they're running around looking anxious, you probably want to worry about it. And I kind of looked at Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump at the time, and these people were in rooms full of, these people have got aircraft they can leave the ground in. They've got hazmat suits hanging up in the closet, right? And they're just dressed in a normal suit in a room full of press people talking about this deadly killer plague that's sweeping around the world and killing everybody in Italy over the age of 80, right? And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, they don't seem very concerned. You know, they'd be the first people in the air. Trump would have been on Air Force One and Trudeau would have been, you know, hiding in a cottage on Lake Huron. I mean, the reality is it was just a very perverse set of circumstances. And it wasn't like the military were trying to lock you in your homes. People were fighting over toilet roll in Safeway. And it was just all absolutely bizarre. And therefore, obviously, from the start, you could tell that something was wrong and that something even more wrong was going to come after it. But it was very easy, as Shaun touched on and you've touched on, to sell to people a couple of very basic concepts. And one was they were able to get them to put a badge on that said, I'm saving lives.
Yeah.
Right. And that changes the way people behave. They become sanctimonious and self-righteous because virtually none of us get a chance in life to save someone's life. It's very rare. Some people in the fire department do, soldiers and people in the military do, some doctors do, but very few of us get a chance to save a life. So it's very seductive, isn't it, to be told that by just putting a mask on and by injecting something in your arm that you've not even thought about yet and had no doctor's advice on at all, none, but you're just going to put it in, you're going to pull up at a tent and allow a student with a mask on to stick a needle in your arm, and and you're saving lives. Then put your badge on, show how many vaccines you've had, and run around saying you say, incredibly seductive. It was unbelievably effective psychology, and then divided off a group of people that the government were able to identify. These people kind of know what we're up to. These people we don't like, and we've got to stop them talking to anybody else. So how do we stop them talking to anybody else? Let's not let them go to the pub. Let's not let them go to the restaurant. Let's stop them going to the gym. Let's stop them getting on the plane, because we don't want these people who have rumbled us to get on the plane and start telling all these people who haven't yet rumbled us what might be going on. It's fascinating, Natasha. Millions of people now know a lot more about it, and that'll just keep going. And
well, that also explains why the mainstream media have never reported on, none of the big mainstream media organizations have reported on this case. I mean, this is probably, if not one of the largest constitutional challenges in recent Canadian history. And even more so at the time when we started it. And the media have never discussed it. And
Nobody
like Karl
from
said,
the Post media has contacted you?
no. I spoke with Brian Lilly once, but I'm talking about like CTV, CBC, Global. Okay. None of these major organizations, television news networks has ever, CP24, none of them have ever contacted us to do an interview or even discuss it. I did speak to Brian Lilly once. Nothing really much came of that. He did write a piece, but it was kind of a little bit, it wasn't a great, I think he was a little worried at that time too. He's become a little more outspoken since then. But during the time when all this was going on, there was not one mainstream media news network that came to us and wanted to interview us. Two Canadian guys, two Brits in Canada, whatever you want to call it, suing the federal government in one of the largest constitutional challenges in recent history, and they didn't even want to talk about it. I'll tell you who did. They talked about it in England. We made headline news in the Telegraph in England. We were on GB News. Sky News talked about it, and then various other US news stations talked about it. But nobody, not one big news network in Canada has ever in 4 years contacted us to discuss this case.
It is interesting. I mean, I think that the National Post might have contacted Brian Peckford at some point about his case, which was managed under our case. But then there was some interest around Brian because he was a former premier, and we know Brian, and very lucky to know him. He's a very nice man and a very bright man. But I think at the time as well, when we first launched the case, the Freedom Convoy was going on, which was obviously the big news. And the Freedom Convoy was really profound in our case because, I mean, we're very lucky. We know Tamara and Chris, and they're very good Canadian people for sure, and have been treated abominably. I mean, just a horrendous amount of government lawfare. I mean, I've rarely seen anything like it. It's like banana republic behavior. It's embarrassing for Canada. I mean, I travel a lot for work, and I talk to people around the world, and I think Canadians got to do a bit of waking up on how the world sees Canada. It's not popular to say this, but
Canadians are the most, like, among the most. I've traveled to 5 continents. I'm not saying I've traveled all around the world, but I've traveled a decent amount. And Canadians are among the most parochial people on planet Earth.
And some of it's geographical, right, in terms of our location with, America's just to the south, so it's very easy to go to the States, which is a wonderful country full of amazing places. So you could spend 3 lifetimes traveling around the States and never see it all, right? So, and then, there's Mexico and all the rest of the things. But we do tend to be a bit like that. We go to Mexico, Costa Rica,
All
Hawaii.
inclusives. They go to all inclusives when they travel, and they go to Florida, and then they complain about Americans. It's the Canadian way.
Yeah.
Countries, and they don't see us in the way that the media sells us to ourselves. And at the moment, there's some things that are just quite challenging, and I think that that's something that we could do with addressing. But the Freedom Convoy, I said, was very profound in our case, because it was an amazing event and an amazing protest, which succeeded wildly in my view, in pressuring the provincial governments to back off.
Yeah.
Right? They were scared to death of all that. They suddenly saw something going on, and they thought, this is awful. The numbers are bad. The optics are bad. It ended Jason Kenney's career in Alberta, political career, although he's trying to reinvigorate it now. But at the time, it ended his career. I mean, David Eby, even our appalling premier in British Columbia, was horrified by it, at the time. Well, it actually was not even him. It was his predecessor, wasn't it? But his predecessor was horrified by it. And they suddenly found themselves with truck protests in Victoria, a city where nothing ever happened, and of course it happened, and it made them have to rethink about what they were doing. And so when our case was actually getting into cross-examination, a lot of the momentum that the Freedom Convoy created in terms of pushing provincial mandates backward was enormously helpful to us, because had that not happened, I think we would have struggled to get Lametti to realize the impact of the evidence. So it would be vain and silly of us to claim any degree of success in June 22 without acknowledging the amazing sacrifice by people like Tamara Leach and Chris Barber and others who are much less well known, who have also been suffering at the hands of the government and haven't had perhaps the good fortune of the support that Tamara and Chris have had. But a fantastic protest, can't say enough good things about it, and helped our case a great deal. That's fair, isn't it, Shaun, I think?
Yeah, I believe you're right there. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely what Canada needed to turn the corner on the COVID regime. I don't know what would have happened had that protest not happened.
Yeah,
Because things were just getting worse in Quebec. They were talking about fining the unvaccinated.
I remember that.
They were trying to keep people out of grocery stores, I think, in New Brunswick. We couldn't go to Costco in Quebec.
Well, you guys had the curfews. That was
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah, I can't explain to people how eerie it was to go out alone, because I did as I pleased. I'm a free woman, and I'll do as I please. And I would go walking, and I've never heard a more silent city in my life. It was like being in the woods in the middle of nowhere, the crunch of the snow. Nobody's around. It was a ghost town. It was like post-apocalyptic, eerie.
Bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, truly bizarre, and truly bizarre that people submitted. It's astonishing. I'm not a rebellious person. I'm very, very waspy, but I won't abide by certain. I won't abide. I won't live in an insane asylum with other people. I just won't. So
No.
I felt that that's what this was, and I just continued to live my life and maintain my sanity by living normally. And I was astonished by all these rebels who were so submissive and so enthusiastic and so excited to be able to kind of chastise other people and want to control how their faces were, and
It really
yeah,
really showed us who people were back then, didn't it? And to this day,
yeah,
there's still people I won't talk to. There's still people who don't talk to me. It's just like I had no idea just what absolute evil morons a lot of these people are. And Canada was full of them, right? They were attacking people in malls for not wearing masks. There was a Canadian Tire store not far from here where they wrestled an older man to the ground. You know, the staff, and they were. And what was kind of most disgusting about that was it made it on the news. And the news didn't condemn the attackers. It
no,
almost justified what they did. They didn't come out and say, well, you know, that's what you get, but they pretty much came close to that, right? They were almost condoning it and promoting it as well.
there
You
is.
know, if you wear a mask, then it wouldn't have happened, kind of thing, right? Like
Yeah, I
it's
mean, he easily could have killed 100 people with that face of his. Thank God he was put down.
yeah,
Everybody really dodged a bullet.
yeah.
There was a woman who was murdered, and actually for this interview, I was looking for video of it and I couldn't find it. But there was a woman who was murdered in a
In the
hospital for
hospital,
not wearing a mask.
you'll find it on my feed. I posted. I went kind of viral. I think it got
Okay,
about 1 million views. It's somewhere buried in my feed. But yeah, the security guards, right? And then they
yeah,
turned the camera around.
yeah, they killed
They
her. They
actually
murdered
they
her.
killed her. They actually killed her,
Yeah,
and they were never charged.
no,
No.
and people memory hold it, and I haven't forgotten
Yeah.
her. And
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten, I know you guys have to get going, you're busy, but I remember during the course of this interview, I remembered being with a client who worked in the pharmaceutical industry. And during Warp Speed, hearing the misgivings of this client about um, the circumstances under which the companies were developing these therapeutics. But then, as soon as it was rolled out under Biden, the tune changed, and this person ended up like really angry and confronting me because I didn't want to get it, and it was
Yeah.
just like a complete 180. And someone that you know and have a good relationship with, and that you've worked really hard for, and you've established a friendship with, and just to have that 180 makes you feel very destabilized in terms of
Yeah.
what other people in your life would be you know, willing to put up with, and then in the name of really like corporatism.
I
I
It's
don't
think
want to. I don't want to cut anybody off here, but I just realized because I had to do this emergency setup here with my phone on
yeah.
a
Is your
stand,
phone going to
and
die?
it's about to die. Yeah. So
Okay, let's wrap it up.
okay.
Any last thoughts that you guys have? And for everybody watching, I'll also put this out on YouTube and Rumble. If you prefer to share it that way, then that would be great.
Yeah,
But
and please put it up on X because I'll share it. Oh,
yeah,
then
yeah,
I
it's
can
already
send
up.
you.
It's already up
Okay.
on X. Yeah,
Oh, this is on. Okay, perfect.
we're live streaming right now.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. All right. Well, thank you for having us on. And again,
you're very
if I can
welcome.
just reiterate to people, please, if you can attend on Monday, November 3rd at 1 p.m. at the federal court, go to my X account at Shaun Rickard 67 and register. It takes literally less than a minute, and we need as many
Online.
people to show up as possible.
Yeah, you don't even have to leave your house.
That's right. Do it right on your phone.
Yeah,
thank you, Natasha. It's been really nice of you to have us on the show,
yeah,
and
it's my pleasure.
thanks very much for allowing us to speak about the case. And my final words would be for those that do watch it. Do think about the broader implications of what the case is about and how that would impact in other circumstances. And if you have friends who are skeptical about it, then that's the way to approach it. Is think, well, look, don't just think about whether you for or against vaccine mandates, but think about what other ways the government could use this kind of measure in the future, which might impact a different group of people. That's the way I would look at it, rather
Yeah.
than trying to see it just on very narrow channel. Thank you very much.
Well done.
First principles, always first principles, right? So thank you very much for doing this
Thank you,
for
Natasha.
all Canadians. I don't know how much praise you get, but you should be getting a lot.
Yeah, we get some, we've got some really amazing followers and some very generous people helping with our litigation fund. So to all
That's a
those, thank you.
question for people who wish to donate. Maybe you could put up in the comments after a way to do
Yeah,
so if you need.
there's our website, which unfortunately right now is down. We're hoping that's
Yeah.
going to be up again soon. But there's also they can send donations still by e-transfer right now, and they'll find that in one of the posts online as well on my X feed as well. So I don't
Perfect.
remember the email address for that offhand. I wasn't prepared, sorry. But
okay.
yeah, they can find it on the in various different updates on my feed. There is an e-transfer email address that they can send donations to, and they'd be very much appreciated because
Perfect.
this has been a very costly and lengthy fight, and it's going to probably go on for a little bit longer yet. So again, and thank you for having us on. I really appreciate it, and it's very nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I was happy to meet both of you. And maybe you can come back at some point and give people an update as the developments unfold.
We'd
Love to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Be well and God bless. And thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good one. Bye.